Hello, good evening, everybody. Welcome to Wednesday Night Live from Courtroom Confidential, the fastest growing true crime news channel on YouTube. Thank you all so much for being here. I'm very excited about this evening. You could say that I'm juiced for this evening because we've got a very special guest that I've been trying very hard to make our schedules coordinate so that we could get her on to talk about, especially the case that we're going to be talking about this evening, which is Sean Diddy Combs. And that is Julia Jenaé from Court TV. She's an anchor at Court TV. I am a huge fan of her because I always appreciate her incredibly balanced and nuanced and thorough reporting that she does on all of these cases, as does everybody over at Court TV. But Julia is a favorite of mine. So we're going to have her on to talk. But then there's a lot of other interesting cases that have taken place this week, including some, I would call it breaking news from today. That includes, first of all, Brian Walshe was in court this week. We can talk about the latest with him. There's a new argument that his attorneys want to make regarding Google searches that could, depending on how it goes, really change the landscape of that case. That's number one. Number two is Smokey Robinson. I'm a big fan of Smokey Robinson. Everybody's a big fan of Smokey Robinson. If you don't know him, you know his music for sure. And he's under investigation for some really awful allegations here in California. So we could talk about the latest on that. And then finally, the one that I hope, if I'm voting, if I'm allowed to have a vote, Tiffany, am I allowed to have a vote? If I am, I'm voting for Bryan Kohberger because there was a new motion filed by the defense today. I know that's a shocker to everybody who's been following this case that the defense is filing a new motion, but it was 40 pages long. Kevin Fixler just sent me over the latest article that he published on that. And they're asking for a continuance on the trial based upon this new Dateline episode. And they have some arguments. There are some teeth to their arguments, and we can talk about that. So we're going to talk with Julia about Sean Diddy Combs. But in the meantime, the poll will be Brian Walshe, Smokey Robinson, and Bryan Kohberger. As always, stay to the end. We have announcements, but in the meantime, it's so good to see all of you, Afton and Susan D and Alicia K. Mayo and Farm Girl and Hannah UK and P. Lola's mom. And thank you everybody for being here and in the chat and spending some time with us on a Wednesday evening. And let's go ahead. Oh, you have to hit those like buttons. I keep on forgetting. Hit the like buttons. Let's let YouTube know that we're here, and let's me shut up and introduce our guest for this evening. Hey, Julia, how are you?
Josh, it's so good to see you in
It's
this
so good
format.
to see you too. It's been a while. How are you been?
I've been good. I feel like we've been trying to make the East Coast, West Coast thing work when it comes to our schedule. So I'm just happy to be on Courtroom Confidential. You give us such great analysis on Court TV. And so it's great to be on your platform.
Oh, you're very kind. You're very kind. You are very busy over at Court TV. You guys are usually busy, but I feel like this is one of those perfect storm situations where you've got all these cases that you've been following for so long, have not, no one's coordinated their calendars with Court TV, and now they're all happening at once. You've got, you know, Sean Diddy Combs. It's unfortunate that it's a federal case, and so there's no cameras in court, but it's also helping you guys out a little bit in that at the same time that you're covering Karen Reed every single day,
all day, every day.
All day, every day. And whatever kind of craziness comes with that. Then there's the Sean Diddy Combs case. You guys may have heard about Harvey Weinstein. Nobody talks about him anymore, but he's still on trial. It's just a lot all happening at once. I imagine you guys are having a hard time catching your breath.
You know, we're used to it because we've always got a bunch of trials going, but you're right in terms of high profile cases and ones that the public just seem to not be able to get enough of and want those just regular detailed updates. Sean Diddy Combs and Karen Reed are really leading the day. So staying on top of every detail in those cases, it's a challenge. We're up for the challenge. And typically we've got about 4 or 5 cases that are kind of going on, but nothing to the magnitude of this one.
Yeah.
We've got people inside of that courtroom in Sean Diddy Combs coming in and out just on the hour, every hour.
And it's got to make the coverage of it so much more difficult, I imagine, in that it is, you know, it's almost like we're back in caveman days, that you've got people literally inside with no way to communicate with the outside world in real time, taking handwritten notes, and then what do? Rush outside, get to a phone, and tell you guys everything they know as quickly as they can?
Basically, but we're at this point pros at it because we have done so many federal trials. So we have systems, we have ways of taking pictures of those notes, getting them to people who can then transcribe them. AI helps with some things these days of quickly getting them
Incredible.
into a format that we can then get on the screen so people can see it. Our legal correspondent, Kelly Craft, she's there and she can verbally tell us everything she is seeing and saying, but it's a oiled machine, but it takes a lot of hands to make it
Wow.
happen.
Wow. Well, we're going to take advantage of all of that hard work that you guys are doing, because it is hard to follow this if you're interested in this case by just reading, news reports. I've done as much research as I can to try to, get an idea of what's been happening, but you're really at the mercy of whatever reporter you're reading. New York Times, Washington Post, doing great work, but they're picking and choosing what they feel are the highlights too. And it's kind of hard to understand if you're not watching. What you may feel is important may be different when what they feel is important. But let's, kind of just dive into some of the highlights from the past week. And then we'll get to what I feel are kind of the fundamental legal issues at play here that I still think are not entirely settled in this case. I know it's early on, but still some big question marks. So anyhow, we know that last week the big witness was Cassie Ventura. She's kind of the main complaining witness victim in this whole case. But recently her mother testified, Regina Ventura. Can you tell us a little bit about what are some of the takeaways from her testimony?
Sure. And I want to first give a little story about what happened during jury selection that had me anticipating that Regina Ventura was going to be taking the stand. There
Yeah.
was a potential juror who had a daughter or sister or some female relative who had dealt with an assault, a sexual assault, but they felt that they could still be a fair juror. And I don't remember if it was the judge or the attorney. I think it was actually the judge who asked him, would you even be able to sit there and mother takes the stand and tells you that these things happened to her daughter? And the juror was a bit reluctant, but ultimately said, yes, I can be fair. I don't believe that he actually made it onto the jury. Strikes were used against him, but that set the stage for just how much more empathetic a mother on the stand can be. You have someone who was in the lifestyle, living with Sean Diddy Combs, may have had moments where where she cared about him in terms of casting. So it's a complicated relationship, which the defense has highlighted and the prosecution has owned in a way. But to have her mother take the stand and to testify about that, not only seeing those injuries, because that was horrific, but to be so scared herself of Sean Diddy Combs that they would have to take out that home equity loan in order to pay off this money that this billionaire demanded of them. I mean, that hits on so many levels to a juror, that someone would go after someone's mother, not just their girlfriend, not just domestic violence, but to take it even larger. I think that helped the prosecution even more in ways than Cassie, because it shows how far he was willing to go to try and coerce things to being within his realm.
Yeah, and it's weird the way, at least what I've been able to read, again, we can't watch it, but it was almost like it was a flex on his part with the money, because he eventually gave the money back. But it was like, and correct me if I'm wrong, the way I understood it is that Cassie would kind of go back to her mother and maybe in these kind of really vain and desperate attempts to try to leave this life if she could, and he would try to extend his control over her. And one of the times that she was trying to, that she was with her mother, he like said, well, you need to give me 20 grand for the money I've spent on you. And it wasn't like, you owe me money. It was like a flex. I can't think of a better term. It was like almost like a extortion of them, that I'm going to get this money out of you, that they had to then take loans out. They took it so seriously. They didn't just tell him to go pound sand. They took it so seriously. They took out loans to give him this money. And then he ends up returning the money. It just kind of plays into that whole idea of control though. Correct?
Absolutely. And that's what the prosecution has to prove. I know we're going to talk about this a lot later, but it's not just the commercial sex. It's not the going across state lines. It's the fraud, coercion, and force that they have to prove. And that it has to be closely linked to why Cassie felt that she had to be a part of these quote freak offs, why the escorts felt that they had to keep coming or couldn't get out of whatever it was when he was demanding. So yeah, I think a flex is a great way to define it, but I think the prosecution wants it to go even further, that this was someone who wanted to control
Yeah,
people and that people were so fearful that you would go instead of going to police, instead of going to a lawyer to say, can he do this? Just because
right.
he gave my daughter an apartment, just because he paid for some of her expenses, why am I on the hook? You'd
Right.
think that would be the first place they go. I don't know if that played into it at all. But to ultimately go to the bank and take out a loan against your home just to cover this, I think is surprising and goes to that fear that prosecution needs to hammer home in this case.
Yeah, and not even tell him to go take a hike. Like, are you
Mhm.
kidding me? We're together. I've been with you for how long, and you're gonna demand money out of me because you had to spend a little bit on me? Like, you're a billionaire, but you're absolutely right. It's it makes the jurors, I imagine, go, "Wow, they actually took this so seriously. They went out and got a loan to pay it because they're concerned about what would happen if they didn't." And that's kind of the unanswered question of what would he do had they not paid him that money. Crazy, crazy stuff.
And these parents aren't the young, naive 22-year-old that Cassie Ventura was. So if she's saying, I did these things, sure, maybe you do things when you're young and dumb. You didn't know that when he said this, he didn't really mean it, that you had options. No, these parents of seasoned age also didn't believe that these threats were empty.
Very good point. Really solid point. Yeah, we're talking about now it's not just someone maybe existing in that cycle of abuse and not really thinking correctly. This is someone on the outside still feeling the overall reach of his power. Another person who testified was David James, who was a former assistant of Diddy's. And walk us through this weird, well, not weird, frightening story in regarding Suge Knight. Of course, he would have had to be brought up in this case somehow, right? I don't think we could get through this whole trouble without Suge Knight making appearance. But tell us about this.
Yeah, because it's not just about what's happened in the last 5 years, right? They are taking this pretty far back when it
Yeah,
comes to showing this jury this pattern. And essentially, David James talked about seeing weapons and seeing Suge Knight and Diddy Combs deciding we're going to go and take care of and handle something, and just being this very frightening scene for him. So he's this personal assistant who was tasked with stocking the hotel rooms for Diddy, among other things. I mean, he was what we've seen in the TV shows of personal assistants, where you're on call basically 24/7 for a celebrity. You get them whatever they want to their very specific liking. And he was a helpful witness when it comes to the freak offs, because he could talk about how he stocked the hotel rooms, what he put in, the baby oil that he had ready for Diddy Combs. But also, he could talk about the things that he witnessed. And I do think weapons and seeing Sean Combs planning to do things with those weapons, the prosecution is somehow going to, because you didn't hear Cassie talk a lot about ever being threatened with a weapon.
yeah,
But if you can show that he moved with a vibe of, if you don't obey me, then the weapons will be used as they have been in other situations, then the prosecution is trying to make that link between all of this, which, I mean, it's a tall order with someone
yeah,
who's got a life so vast.
yeah. I thought it was interesting because it was the first witness who kind of painted him not as this entitled, spoiled, rich celebrity who just kind of gets what he wants and is abusive, but he's like a gangster. I mean, this, it's a far step from physical abuse, mental abuse of a person that you're with, and then just this kind of lavish lifestyle to saying, grab the guns, throw them in the car. We're going to go try to find this guy. Right. I mean, that's the story, is that they're in Los Angeles. Was it in LA that this happened? I
I
think it
believe
was.
it's in LA, yes.
they're in Los Angeles. They are out getting burgers and they spot Suge Knight and his crew, and they decide to run back to Diddy's place and soldier up essentially, and then go back and try to find him with the idea that maybe like a shootout was going to take place. Like I said, this is now, we're talking gangster behavior. We're not just talking spoiled celebrity behavior.
And we have to keep in mind what's also in the background. It's not going to come up in this trial, I'm sure, but the family of Tupac Shakur, they have hired attorneys to reopen the investigation and look into Sean Diddy Combs' involvement in Tupac's death. So again, when I say he's got this vast lifestyle, it's decades of him
Yeah.
being in the public eye. And I think there probably are a lot of people who have been in his position in terms of being in the industry, coming from where he came from, who may have lived a certain life, lived a rougher life, and then things have changed. But that's the beauty of RICO. You can bring a lot of incidents together, even if the statute of limitations normally would have passed on them.
Yeah, and I do want to get to RICO. I don't want to keep teasing it, but it's something I really want to talk about because it is an incredibly powerful tool for the federal government. And one of the reasons being what you just outlined is that it essentially opens up the statute of limitations to almost limitless if they can show that this is an ongoing criminal enterprise. We also heard some testimony from Homeland Security Special Agent Gerard Gannon. He really talked about the search of the homes, the recovery of weapons, nothing that to me was all that earth shattering, unless you've got something else.
No, you and me both, Josh. I really was surprised when I was getting a list I had to read on air of the things that were recovered, including all of these 7-inch women heels in his closet, the lingerie, the baby oils, the Astroglides, and I guess some things that even we couldn't say on air because the note I got was some other adult items that we weren't going to detail. But I couldn't help but wonder, what does this have to do with sex trafficking and RICO? I'd imagine they can try to make the connection that he had these things in order to be ready for RICO. In itself, if Homeland Security comes in your house and finds a bunch of women's heels, are you going to jail for that by itself?
No.
Even that with lingerie. I mean, he is not someone who's quiet about his sex life. We have his music. So I did think that was for more shock value to go through everything that was found. But
yeah. And this is that raid that we all watched on TV, right? This was the coordinated raid here in Los Angeles and in Florida with, military type vehicles coming in. And I was thinking, I remember at the time, I'm thinking to myself, if the federal government is doing this, they are definitely indicting this man because they're not going to make a splash this big without indicting him. And they did indict him. And then I thought, okay, well, whatever was recovered from that raid was obviously killer enough for them to bring these types of charges against a person of, as high a celebrity status as he is. And not to say that it wasn't helpful, but it's also like, where's the kilos? Where's the kilos? Where's the torture chambers? Where's all the stuff that we were kind of expecting? And it really, not to say that guns and drugs and all that other stuff isn't bad, but it was not kind of what I was expecting.
Yeah, no, I thought that there was going to be there would be other charges underneath. It's hard to not talk about RICO yet, Josh.
Yeah.
I do want to make a case comparison. So another high-profile RICO case that had wrapped up recently in Georgia was the one against rapper Young. And that it didn't involve sex trafficking. It didn't involve any domestic violence like we're seeing in this one, but it was all about drugs, robbery, assaults. There was an attempted murder, things that he himself may not have done, but his organization, which was alleged, and he has pleaded out for that case. But that's what I thought we would see underneath sex trafficking. I thought there would be perhaps some drug charges, some specific assaults on people, use of the guns in a certain way. So it's just interesting how it's played out.
Two more witnesses I want to get to, and then let's just jump into the real meat and potatoes of what's happening in this case. But Jenaé, and I'm pronouncing it, I hope correctly, Jenaé Hayes, but everybody is now referring to him by his nickname of the Punisher. He is one of the male escorts that was hired multiple times to take part in these freak offs. He testified that he had sex with Cassie on multiple occasions where he was being directed by Sean Combs. He interestingly says that the first time he's contacted, it was to perform as a stripper, but then it became really apparent to him they were expecting much more of him, and the only person he's there with is Cassie. And then in walks this masked figure that he doesn't even really know is Sean Combs at the time, who's sitting in the corner, kind of directing things. And what stood out to me, but I don't want to take away from your points, was as much as he described all of this, he's describing, in my view, consensual behavior of Cassie, because the most that I feel like he said is that when Sean Combs, who he later learned was Sean Combs, was giving directions, that sometimes she would sigh or seem reluctant, but that there was never this, unless I missed something, there was never this kind of like obvious idea that she was being forced against her will to participate in these things. Do I seem to have that right in your view?
Yeah, his testimony was not as strong for the prosecution as Daniel Phillips's was, who was one of the first witnesses on
Right,
the stand. Daniel Phillips noticed things like Cassie being dragged into another room,
right,
uh, Sean Combs yelling at her for not doing what he said, hearing things that sounded like abuse, and just feeling very bad for her, feeling like they had this bond. I didn't get that from the Punisher. It even seemed like there were some things that he said that, to your point, helped the defense in this case. But I think one of the two main reasons that he's being called is when you look at the statute that Sean Diddy Combs is charged under, this goes to that this was commercial sex because he was paid. And
right.
that's part of sex trafficking. You have to prove that there is commercial sex happening. And the enticement part of it, that Sean Diddy Combs may have been the one to pick him at some point, that he was the one directing maybe sometimes. So they have to establish that he's the one in charge. And if this person can add to that for the jury, that even if he's not a slam dunk witness, which I don't think a lot of these witnesses are slam dunks. I think many of them, Kelly Craft has been in the courtroom. She said that uh, they sometimes seem reluctant to be there, that they are under subpoena. That's why they are testifying. And even David James, who we talked about earlier, she saw an interaction between the two of them where he gave Sean Diddy Combs a nod and then Diddy gave him a nod back. So
Wow.
I don't know how to interpret that. If that's a look, I'm just here because I have to be and wish you well, or is it just an acknowledgement of two people who knew each other for a long time?
Wow, that's interesting. Or are these people who have been in fear of this man's power for so long that they're still kind of in fear of him? I mean,
Mhm.
he's still got a lot of connections and a lot of pull, I imagine, even outside of, from outside of the walls of his jail cell. I wonder if that's playing a role in it.
Mm.
And then finally, there was Dawn Richard, who is a singer, performer. She was part of the group Danity Kane. And she talks about I mean, the main takeaway I took from the reports I read is that she talks about having witnessed abuse, physical abuse at a dinner, and this was a celebrity studded dinner. We've got Usher and Neo and Jimmy Iovine, all these big names there. And it was unclear to me if they had witnessed the abuse as well, but they're at a party where he's being physically abusive with Cassidy.
Yeah, it didn't sound like other celebrities witnessed this, but Dawn Richard, an important witness for sure for the prosecution because she was in the mix with Sean Diddy Combs. She was part of his Making the Band era,
Mm,
where he put together Danity Kane. She was part of it. He kept her after letting go everyone else in the group and put her in other situations, and she supported him actually for a little while. But after Cassie's lawsuit came out, she filed her own lawsuit that even then supported some of the things that Cassie said. So I feel like the fact that she was able to talk about what she witnessed is something that sets her apart from even Daniel Phillips, because it's something that she can say that she saw, not just something that she heard or assumed. David James once saw her unconscious, her being Cassie Ventura, on a bed and an unknown man in the corner. But that doesn't quite get to, did you see the abuse? Did you see this domestic violence?
Um, a person who has not yet testified, but that a lot of people are talking about, is the idea that Kid Cudi, the hip hop artist, his real name is Scott Mescudi, is going to be called. His name has come up before now. He apparently had maybe a romantic relationship with Cassie Ventura, but he was certainly seen as a romantic rival of hers. And then there's this, I'm going to be corny and say, bombshell evidence of perhaps a car bomb actually being used against him. And there was evidence that he had a car explode on him, which I'm shocked that I had not heard any of this beforehand, but apparently if you're really in the weeds on this case, you know about this already. But he's expected to testify. Is that what we anticipate?
Oh yeah, I can't wait, first of all, for Kid Cudi to take the stand in this case, because I think there's so many reasons that he is a super strong witness. But yeah, we have known about this because of the civil lawsuits and the indictment. This incident, I mean, it shows what the prosecution has to prove. This power coercion that would even expand to someone who's famous in their own right, rich in their own right, but it did not stop him allegedly from taking matters into his own hands. And it's something that Cassie would have known about. So if you're in her position, and we have this forensic psychologist on the stand today talking about what it's like for a domestic abuse victim, if you know that he's willing to do this to a man who has access to his own security and could have done what he needed to do, perhaps to protect his area if he'd known it was coming. What is Cassie? What can she do to protect herself if
Really,
Kid Cudi can't?
really excellent point, because the just calling it as I see it, the defense, I thought, did make some strides, did score some points with going through Cassie's text messages and pointing out all the times where it looks as though she was looking forward to these freak offs and participating in them and planning them. And the big question is, hey, if you're really this suffering victim at the hands of this man, why are you doing that? And this expert testifying and explaining that cycle of abuse is one thing. But then you're right. If she's aware of and watching this happen to another powerful person, she's thinking to herself, what chance do I possibly have? So that will be some really incredible testimony that we're looking forward to coming up in maybe as early as this week. But
Tomorrow is the latest that we're hearing,
oh
that
wow,
he may be on the stand. And the idea that he's not going to be able to face those cross-examination questions, Josh, where it's, did you want money? Did you want fame? Are you doing this for something? No one's thinking that Kid Cudi would want to come forward in order to boost his own name over something like this.
excellent point. Excellent point. Doesn't have all of the baggage, quote unquote, that some of the other witnesses might have that the defense could exploit. This is a person who's got no other reason to testify other than to tell the truth. Let's get though to the real heart of the matter, and where, again, I find Diddy to be if everything is true, all of the allegations are true, this is deplorable, criminal, awful, unchecked behavior by someone for a very long time. But what he's charged with here is RICO. And RICO is a very specific statute. It is very broad and far reaching, but you have to satisfy certain elements. I'm going to give the broad strokes on it, and then maybe you can talk us through kind of your thoughts on it. But basically in RICO, you have to show that there is a criminal enterprise, meaning people operating in cooperation and with each other to commit certain criminal acts. The criminal acts in this case are sex trafficking and transportation. The sex trafficking is not just the idea of engaging in prostitution, but it has to include elements of force, fraud, or coercion. Same with the transportation. It's not just that these people who are in the sex worker industry are coming across state lines and being brought across state lines, but that it's done without their consent and there is elements of coercion. So all of this case, as horrible as what we're hearing, it's really coming down to the idea of, was this all being done without consent as far as the sex acts go, in order to prove an overall overarching criminal enterprise? And I know I've gotten a little bit wordy, but help me out here in the way that you see it.
It's a wordy statute, right? Yeah. It's one that is complicated. Not every attorney can handle a RICO case. Not every attorney is going to raise their hand to get involved in a RICO case because it's so complicated. And you mentioned broad. I always point out to our viewers and people who ask me about RICO is that this is not just a mobster type law. It's not just going after powerful people who have big businesses. They've used RICO civilly and criminally, so individuals can file a RICO claim against banks, against government entities, against major sports leagues, for if they're not paying their workers on time consistently, they go after them for RICO. Say it's a criminal enterprise, you are committing wage fraud, and you should be punished. And they're able to use that to bring everything together, every incident that has happened all together that they may not have been able to do before. So it's a tool that the prosecution uses. I want to go back to something that I witnessed when I was at the R. Kelly trial.
Yes, please. And tell us why that's important too, because this is a very similar.
Very similar. Yeah. His was a RICO case as well. Yeah. Indictment almost reads word for word. Mann Act, violation of sex trafficking. His involved some instances of underage women. And so that's the only thing that I see that really makes a difference. Also, inflicting sexually transmitted diseases on someone was what he was charged with as well. So that was a bit of a nuance. But people outside, protesters who were there every day playing I Believe I Can Fly, they would chant, "One man ain't no enterprise, the government be telling lies." Wow. And they were basically upset that R. Kelly was the only one charged if this was supposed to be a criminal enterprise. But R. Kelly was successfully convicted in that case. So we have here even a step, I think, back where you don't have anyone who's underage, no one who's saying they felt trapped in rooms the way that the women that I saw testify in R. Kelly's case, but you still have commercial sex of sorts because there was payment done, there was transporting over state lines, and there was this fear factor, the blackmail, that I've got these videos of you, which Cassie said he had videos, and so you still do this or I will release these videos. So there are certainly similarities between those two cases, but I'm just very fascinated by the evolution of RICO in these high profile cases over time.
Yeah, and the reason why the government does it is because it does allow them to, like you said, go back decades. I mean, they can, as long as they can show that this criminal enterprise has been active and operating, they don't have to deal with the same worries about statute of limitation stuff. So that's why we're hearing about things from decades ago. They can swallow that all up in this ongoing criminal enterprise and swallow up, kind of loosely related crimes too. So you've got, the idea of what is his, what is the, what's the guy's name again? David James, the former assistant, testifying to him driving around with guns. What does that have to do with the Punisher having sex with Cassie? But they're able to wrap it all up into this idea of, if you view Sean Combs as the mob boss of a criminal enterprise, which essentially its goal is to serve his interests, whether they be exploitation of people or sexual gratification, then you can bring in all of those other crimes to prove that overall conspiracy.
Yeah, and that is why it is used. It's a bit complicated in the way that they string together these, but overt acts, which are what they call these crimes or alleged crimes that are underneath this overarching criminal enterprise and RICO case, the overt acts don't have to be able to stand individually as cases. They don't
Right.
have to be able to be proven beyond a reasonable doubt. But when you start stacking things together, and if they can show that it's all flowing through the criminal enterprise, even if they're dissimilar, it still comes under the case. And like you said, it protects them if there's a statute of limitations issue. It protects them if they don't have anyone really to corroborate one, but they have, at least in Young Thug's case, they had social media messages that they claim proved that this was part of their overt acts in this criminal enterprise.
That's a really good point too, that shouldn't be lost and is a little nuanced, but it's the idea that you are kind of allowing some of these things to cross corroborate each other. Maybe there's not as much evidence of certain acts of domestic violence, but maybe they'll feel that, the same guy who committed those acts of or the same guy that planted a car bomb in Kid Cudi's car is the type of person who would, try to control someone through domestic violence. And it's this, piecing together of just overall criminal behavior that allows them to have this really powerful prosecutorial tool that, by the way, could put him away for essentially the rest of his life.
Yeah, the judge made a comment that I noted, and I even put it on my Twitter because I have never heard a judge quite say it like this. But it was outside the presence of the jury. They were talking about what statements are going to come in, like you said, those cross-corroborating statements where the friend Carrie Morgan heard Cassie say that Diddy was controlling her career, or David James heard someone say that Cassie this or that and the other. And the judge said, I want to make sure that these witnesses actually have credible information, eyewitness testimony, basically. And he said, because we don't, quote, it's striking me as a case built on gossip. And
Oh,
I found that very surprising that a judge
yeah.
would use the word gossip in court, because that has so many implications, right? We're always being careful about hearsay, being careful about getting things in and exceptions. And a lot of what comes in, attorneys are trying to make it not seem like gossip. But for a judge to say what some of the things that the prosecution wanted to bring in seems like it could be a case built on gossip, they struck a lot of statements after that conversation with the
And
judge. But
sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but also a very, usually these federal judges are very, buttoned up and you do not get an insight into what they're thinking at all that much. And for him to say something like that is very revealing, perhaps, as the way that he felt, at least in part of the way that the prosecution was putting together their case. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, there's still lots of trial to be done. I do know this about federal prosecutors. They are usually have crossed all their T's and dotted all their I's before they will bring an indictment, and especially an indictment of this high profile nature. So I'm putting faith in the idea that they can eventually close some of these circles here. But there's definitely, from what we've heard so far, if we were to stop here, there's plenty of room for argument for the defense. And that is not me or you, and I'm assuming that we agree on this, but that is not us saying that this isn't horrible stuff we're hearing about. And even criminal behavior, it's just whether or not they satisfy these very specific statutes being charged by him. Go ahead.
well, I totally agree with you that we're not saying that these acts aren't bad, and his own defense team says they're bad.
Very
They
good point.
acknowledged in their opening domestic violence, yes, jerk of a guy, controlling, off the wall, but not a sex trafficker. So I then have to look at, okay, well, what's the downfall if he is found guilty? If they are saying, hey, he did do all these things, but he never got prosecuted for those things. But I wonder how it's going to impact sex trafficking, the way it's defined, and could it even impact people who do sex work? Because it's really more so than I think it has been in the past, criminalizing just that into this entire RICO case.
Really good point. Really good point. I don't want to, if you've got to go, I don't want to keep you, but do you have time for maybe taking a couple of questions from people watching?
Absolutely.
Okay, fantastic. You're fantastic. All right. Canine Lover asks a question here. Will Jennifer Lopez be involved and called to testify in the Diddy case? I have not heard about that, but I know that she, we're talking about going back decades, and she was very close to him for a very long time. You heard anything about that?
And close to him when he would have allegedly had that gun that he
Yeah.
went to trial for before. No, haven't heard her name. We didn't get insight into the witness list. It's something that was not released publicly, but the names that you probably heard in headlines like Michael B. Jordan and Mike Myers, those were said because some jurors said, I'm familiar with those names from this list of 100. And so it got out in the media that these people are potentially coming. And of course, Kid Cudi, we'd known that from lawsuits. So I haven't heard that Jennifer Lopez would be testifying, but I could see a situation where she could be called.
It's funny. I wonder how many closed door discussions were taking place with the prosecution, of how big of celebrities do they actually want to bring in and have testify, because they don't want it to turn into such a circus and to take away from what they're trying to do here. If they start bringing in people like Jennifer Lopez, like maybe there's an argument to be made that she would be a very good witness for the prosecution if she happens to know some things. But I wonder if all of the collateral baggage of bringing someone in like her is something that they just decided against.
Good point. The Harvey Weinstein trial comes to mind. The first
Yeah.
time around in 2020, I was there inside the courtroom for that one. And when Rosie Perez came into the courtroom to testify, it was a moment. Annabelle Sciorra came into there were names that came into the courtroom. And in that situation, I think it helped. I mean, they obviously got a conviction in that case the first time around, even though it was later overturned. But I don't know. I think the prosecution, if they could get her and she would be willing, I don't know that it would take away. I think if she's on their side, it could only help.
Well, yeah. And if she was telling them, I'm happy to testify, that I changed my mind,
Right.
who I imagine a lot of these celebrities are saying, don't get me anywhere near this whole thing. But,
Right. Who wants to subpoena J-Lo?
NC Horse Lover asked a question that kind of touches on what you were explaining before. But if Kid Cudi testifies about the car bombing, can that count as one of the RICO predicates, even though Diddy wasn't charged for the crime?
It can be a predicate, but you're not going to hear in court on the count of arson. The
Right.
jury finds him blank. So it's not one of the counts, but I would agree that it is one of the predicates to show that there was force, fraud, or coercion, because alleged victim number one, Cassie Ventura, has these incidents, these overt acts that the prosecution claims Sean Diddy Combs did to control her. And I think that would fall under it.
And what's interesting about these predicate acts too is because they are not charged, they do not have to prove them beyond a reasonable doubt. And the jurors do not even have to agree on which predicate acts they're using, as long as they can all agree that certain predicate acts took place and therefore satisfy the elements of the statute. There isn't this big, argument taking place on, well, we agree that he car bombed, but we didn't agree to the, trafficked or, committed whatever other crime, hit her at this dinner party that Don Richard testified to, but that it's just, as long as they can satisfy ongoing criminal behavior taking place under this overall umbrella of enterprise. So it's again, a very powerful tool. As a defense attorney, as a prosecutor, I love it. As a defense attorney, it scares the living daylights out of you because you know how powerful it can be for the prosecutor. What other ones do we have here? Oh, here's an interesting one from Afton. If other actors in the enterprise get proffer deals or some kind of immunity, is it still it's still an enterprise right?
Yes.
And yes.
One man ain't no enterprise. That's what they are. They protested and chanted in R. Kelly's case, and it's still, people got deals. They testified against him. He was really the last man standing, and it was still considered a criminal enterprise because he was directing people to do things. And I found something interesting in that one, even that they don't have to know they're part of the enterprise. They don't have to get in a room with him and say, hey, we all need to use this business in order to carry out these crimes. No, if you tell your employee to go do this and it furthers the enterprise, even if you're the only one with it in your mind, it still counts.
Well, and that's why we associate RICO so much with the mafia, because the mafia, before this law was enacted, was very smart in the way that they conducted business, and that they would create all these layers between the main boss. The main boss never spoke to, and maybe didn't even ever meet, the trigger man who actually killed the target. But there was enough layers in between, and everybody knew when he would give the green light on someone, how that would work down the chain of command. And that's what frustrated federal prosecutors for so long, is they could never get the big guy because he was so insulated. And so now RICO cuts all of that apart.
Rico was born.
Pardon me?
And RICO was born.
And RICO was born.
That reason.
And to Afton's point too, this is the US versus Sean Combs. How is that an enterprise, right? To that chant you were talking about earlier. Well, the reason it's an enterprise is that everybody else in the enterprise decided they're going to go ahead and cooperate with the government. And that's why they're not on the other end of that US versus, because the last man standing is Sean Combs, but they're still very much in play in being able to prove an enterprise.
Oh, yeah.
Fascinating case, wide-ranging implications, and I cannot think of, I mean, R. Kelly comes to mind, Harvey Weinstein comes to mind, but you talk about in that upper echelon of celebrity elite and music industry elite, it's hard to imagine a bigger name coming down.
I am so surprised at the immediate fall from grace. I mean, it was just in the months before Cassie Ventura's lawsuit hit the press that he got a key to the city in New York City. He was given honorary degrees. I mean, I had to do one of those advanced Google searches, because if you try to search what were the headlines in Diddy before now, you're only going to get everything from this trial or from this case. But I changed the settings to look at what was going on before September of 2023. And everything was glowing. I mean, he was giving talks, he was getting honored, he was getting lifetime achievement awards. And it's like everything turned in an instant.
Also interesting, and I can't remember where I read it, but I think it was through the testimony of the Homeland Security agent that the break in the case really came after Cassie's lawsuit. And that kind of, it was almost like he wasn't really even on their radar until that lawsuit. Am I getting that right? Do you remember seeing that too?
I don't remember seeing that. I wish I had, because that is actually what I've been saying for a while, especially on air, that it seems like without Cassie him not settling with Cassie before she went public, they would not have had the probable cause to do these raids.
Oh.
They would not have looked at all the evidence and said, what do we have here? And believe that this could look like a RICO case, a sex trafficking case, and go from there. So I think if that is the way that it came out from the Homeland Security, I saw a lot of the testimony, but not every word of the transcript yet. If it was said that way, that would be very surprising, because a lot of people thought, well, he must have been under investigation for years for them to have built a case so quickly. But that would explain why we have 2 alleged victims. Victim 3 that was in the indictment is not even cooperative right now. And it's not the dozens and dozens that we saw in the civil lawsuits. They just haven't had time.
Yeah. And I think the other thing that may have pushed the ball, though I haven't heard them actually flat out say it, is that when that video got released to CNN, it was like no one could ignore this any longer. This is crimes. And the DA here in Los Angeles said, I can't prosecute it. It's past the statute of limitations. And I think, somebody in the Department of Justice said, all right, enough's enough. We're doing something about this. Yeah. Julia, this was so helpful and so kind of you to spend this time and walk us through all of this stuff. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me, Josh. I love talking law with you. This has been great. Tough subject. I always end out by saying, if anyone is dealing with what Cassie went through, what others went through, 1-800-799-SAFE is where those victims can call to get 24/7 help. But hopefully something good comes out of all the attention that this trial has gotten.
Yeah. Thank you again. I hope you let me bug you again to come back and talk to us about this again.
I hope our schedules align again.
Fantastic. All right, my friend. Thank you. Take care. She's so fantastic. And she just, you see why now I'm such a big fan of her and everything that she does. And just as hardworking as she is, I'm very appreciative that she was able to take some time to talk to us. And thank you, Afton, for putting that up. Important stuff. And it's, I don't mean to trivialize it by saying why it's important, because it has to do with celebrities. It has to do with something, far more important than just celebrities. And so I'm glad that that she brought that up. All right. Should we get to the poll here? What won? Did my vote count at all? Did you count my vote, Tiffany? I'm guessing she didn't count my vote. Kaylin, let us know what won the poll. This is my favorite part. Oh, here we go. Kohberger. My favorite part, because I get to I spring this on poor Kaylin as she's doing a zillion other things at once, and then say, put up the poll immediately. Kohberger at 62%. This was probably, this is the fallout from the Dateline episode that came out a week or so ago that we actually covered last week on this very same show, talking about, we went through it with Kevin Fixler. If you guys haven't watched that, by the way, go back and watch last week's Wednesday Night Live, where we had Kevin Fixler on. He's from the Idaho Statesman. He's just the tip of the spear in covering the Bryan Kohberger case. And we walked through that, a lot of what came out in that Dateline episode. So if you are not as much in the weeds on this as I am, what happened was Dateline released a 2-hour special on the Kohberger case. They have done coverage on this case before. I think this was actually their third special that they've done on Kohberger. And of course, we are talking about the tragic deaths, brutal murders of Kaylee Gonzalez, Madison Mogen, Xana Kernodle, and Ethan Chapin. And in this 2-hour special, there was really shocking stuff that came out. It was called The Terrible Night on King Road. Details about how they believe the murders took place. A 3D rendition about what exactly who was killed when, who they believe was the target of all of this. Unseen before surveillance footage of the vehicle that they believe was involved. And it looks like that vehicle was involved because of the high rate of speed it's taking. It's leaving the home soon after when they believe these murders took place. Details about mutilation done to Ethan Chapin, the fighting back of Xana Kernodle. I mean, it just goes on and on. Here's also some photographs that we had never seen before that were allegedly found on Kohberger's phone. And the point of all of it, there's that surveillance footage that we had not seen before. Apparently there was a still of this used in one of the filings. So we can, there's good evidence that this is in fact legitimate, but now we actually have seen the video that we've never seen before. The point of all of it, though, was that Dateline is not disclosing who all of this came from. And they kept on talking about, labeling the sources as being trusted sources close to the investigation. So that comes out on, I think it was last, a weekend ago. Kevin Fixler and I talk about it on Wednesday. That next Thursday, which was last Thursday, the Kohberger sides were back in court, and we were all expecting there's going to be fallout from this, and there was fallout from it. Judge Hippler was none too pleased, and he spent a lot of time talking about that somebody needs to get to the bottom of this. And it's not just, I think, a violation of his non-dissemination order, his gag order. It was about something far more fundamental, that there is a leak, there's a breach, there's a major problem with the security of the evidence in this case. And it's a case where there's already concerns about public perception and too much evidence being out there. And how is this all going to affect the case moving forward? So he actually suggested to the prosecution, and it did seem to me that Hitler was leaning towards the prosecution and law enforcement as being the source of the leak, which is interesting to me because, in my view, both sides have access to all this evidence. Both sides should fall under equal suspicion. But he did seem to kind of I don't want to overdo my way of describing it, but it did seem as though he was looking squarely over at the prosecution side of the table. And he said, I suggest you appoint a special prosecutor, meaning don't just leave this as we're going to take a look at who had access to this stuff. Like, something needs to be done. An investigation needs to be done. Then he ordered both sides to preserve all documents and communications regarding who has access to this evidence. Both sides, he made that order against, meaning there's a order in place now for the defense and the prosecution of anybody and everybody they've talked to about this evidence and may have shared that evidence with. That's a big order. Okay, there's no two ways about that. That is a huge order coming from a judge to say, defense and prosecution, I may be looking at emails and text messages. You lock all of that down now. I don't want any of that going anywhere. And he says, I want you to submit a list of anyone who has ever been involved in this case to me by, I think the deadline was this week. An unhappy judge, put it that way. Well, why is he so unhappy? Because the fallout from that could be disastrous. Now, are we talking about the case getting dropped? No. Are we talking about the death penalty getting dropped? I don't think so. Certainly, there's going to be arguments from Kohberger's attorneys and Taylor. I imagine that's going to come up. But the first argument that comes up is this recently released motion from Ann Taylor. It's 40 pages long. Okay. This is not, hey, judge, we need more time to evaluate this leak. This is, judge, we are leaning on you big time heavy for more time based upon what happened. And it was because of this leak. It's because of this Dateline episode. Here's some quotes that I found from Ann Taylor, and we'll talk a little bit about it. She says, while prompt administration of justice is important to both the state and Mr. Kohberger, the constitutional guarantee of a fair trial outweighs modest delay. And because the majority of cases ending in death penalty are later overturned for error, the public interest lies in ensuring a fair trial in the first instance. That is what we call, in legal parlance, a shot over the bow to the judge. Anytime you are mentioning to a judge that, by the way, doing things like this is exactly what gets cases overturned, and in a death penalty case where everything is going to be gone over with a fine-tooth comb, this is probably not the thing that you want to really be taking a chance on. That's a shot over the bow to the judge. She's essentially saying, judge, I have a reason, and I believe it's a legitimate reason for you to give me a modest delay in this trial. And without some compelling reason why I shouldn't be given that modest delay, you're probably setting yourself up for an appeal and this whole thing getting overturned, perhaps. Do I agree with her arguments? No. Do I think the judge might get sweaty palms based upon those arguments? Yeah, I do. Judges don't like to be overturned. They don't like the biggest case that's ever come through their courtroom to have problems down the road over something as simple as, and that's the way the appellate court will view it, something as simple as a quote unquote modest delay. So are we looking at perhaps a delay in the Kohberger trial? I think it would be silly to say it's not a possibility. It's not a very real possibility. She goes on to talk about Dateline in particular. She says the leaked materials appear carefully curated to promote a narrative of guilt. It raises urgent and serious questions about the objectivity, judgment, and credibility of the individuals tasked with investigating and presenting the state's evidence, particularly those who may be called as witnesses. The identity of those involved, their motives, and any efforts to conceal their conduct go directly to the heart of witness credibility and the integrity of the state's case. What is she saying with all of that lawyerly gobbledygook? She's saying, Your Honor, part of the reason we need this delay is, I agree with you. We need to find out who did this. We need to find out who the leak is. Because, Your Honor, if the leaker is somebody who's on the prosecution's witness list, that's a huge problem. And she ain't wrong. It is a problem. God forbid that the leaker in this case is one of the investigating officers directly involved in this trial. That would be really problematic. And we're not just talking problematic like give Kohberger more time. We're talking problematic like affecting the prosecution's case. We're talking problematic like people being entered on the Brady list and whether or not those witnesses could in fact testify and whether or not the defense is going to have a field day with those people if they do testify. God forbid the leaker is someone who has crucial testimony to give, the collection of evidence. You imagine if the person who was in charge of collecting the evidence in this case, and that cannot be replicated by somebody else, was the leaker, and now you've got this hugely problematic ethical issue with the person who's doing the most important job in this case. I'm not saying any of this is true, and I'm maybe catastrophizing a little bit, but let's explore this to its nightmarish end. What if the person who recovered the knife sheath is the leaker? Then we've got big problems. Now, there appears, as we sit here right now, to be zero evidence of that. But her point is, we need to find that out quickly. Then she also mentions a new book coming out. And she says that the publishers, apparently there's been a couple of books already, but the publisher boasts, this is a quote again from Ann Taylor, pardon me, the publisher boasts of unmatched access to the investigation, including interviews with local law enforcement. This suggests that the apparent Dateline leak was not the only violation of the court's non-dissemination order, meaning the gag order. Well, one, I want to read that book, but two, this is why there's issues in these things that are beyond gag order issues and beyond contempt issues. They can have fundamental problems on a case this serious. And this is not the case you want to mess up. There are 4 beautiful people who lost their lives, and there are 4 families that are grieving in a way that they will never recover from. And they are relying upon this being done right. And this is a state that is saying, we plan on putting this person to death over this. And that is something incredibly, I mean, can you think of something that the government actually does that is should be far more scrutinized than whether or not we decide to take someone else's life in a state-sanctioned way? This is not the case where you want this kind of tomfoolery. You don't want your toms fooling around in this type of a case. And I agree with the judge that they need to get to the bottom of it. And I agree with the defense that getting to the bottom of it means finding out who did it. And we need to know who did it before we begin trial. And if that means that they're going to delay the trial, I could see the judge going along with that. I hope it doesn't happen. I really don't think this is the type of thing that you should delay a trial over. And I think that the defense is employing tactics here. And I don't know why they are so desperate to buy themselves more time, other than they're just trying to prolong the inevitable. But this argument has legs, folks. It's unfortunate, but it really does have legs. Suzanne, who I have sneaking suspicion is hailing from Canada, says, I really hope this doesn't end up causing important evidence from getting into the trial. This is very important and scary. I agree with you. I really hope it doesn't either. And I am not trying to be hyperbolic and get us all wound up, but that is an important issue. Who did, when this first happened, and I didn't even think about it being somebody closely connected to the investigation. What we should pray for is that this leak came by some person just marginally connected to the case that somehow got their hands on some evidence, and that person's not a witness and not really involved in law enforcement. I'm talking about some data entry person That would be something that would preserve this case. But if this is an investigator, if this is somebody closely connected to the collection of evidence or interviews of witnesses or something else important in this case, then we're talking about a mess. All right. Do we have any questions here that I can answer? And then my boss is yelling at me that we should talk a little bit about the Bryan Walshe case, and I'm happy to do that. Let me see. Oh, here we go. Is the judge allowed, this is a great question from Paige M. Thank you, Paige, for being here tonight. Is the judge allowed to order Dateline to reveal their source or no jurisdiction over them? There, depending on the state and the jurisdiction, there are some state, and I am not an expert on this, and I'm not going to try to fake that I am, but there are some states that have far more robust protections for reporters and whether or not they need to reveal their sources. And there are some states that do not. I do not know in Idaho, and that's a great question that I should look into. But to kind of the second part of your question, the non-dissemination order does not apply to Dateline. The judge currently has jurisdiction over the parties, the attorneys, law enforcement as an extension of the prosecution, the people working for the defense, their investigators as an extension of the defense, even family members of the victims as an extension of the prosecution team. And those non-dissemination gag orders apply to all of them. But it doesn't apply to reporters and news people and Dateline. If they get something, they've got a Fifth Amendment right, freedom of the press, to go ahead and publish all of that. So they are not in violation of it. But what if the judge says, well, I want to bring in Dateline, the producers of Dateline, and say, tell us who did this? Well, I'm trying to really think this through as we're talking about it. I think, first of all, there would need to be some sort of criminal investigation opened up. And if a special prosecutor is appointed by the state of Idaho to look into this, and they believe that some sort of illegal activity has taken place in order to get access to that information, then you could say that now they have investigatory power. And if they are refusing to cooperate, again, though, I think they run up a problem with that the Dateline could just simply say, I'm not revealing this source. I know there have been situations in the past, and I feel bad, Paige M, that I don't have the most complete answer to your question. But I know there have been situations in the past where reporters have been found in contempt for not revealing sources, but I don't understand the legal mechanism which made the judge even have the power to be able to do that. And I don't know if it would apply in this case. I will say that if you wanted me to guess, I would say the judge is not allowed to order them. The judge can request it. Law enforcement can request it, but I don't think we're ever going to be seeing a Dateline producer standing in front of Hitler refusing to reveal this source. And now that I've actually said that, we'll probably see that in the coming weeks. One more question on this. Alicia K. Mayo says, could it be a hacker, someone not working on the case? I mean, of course. We live in a day and age where that's a very real possibility. And we live in a day and age, too, where discovery no longer just exists in pages and banker boxes, which is the world I used to work in, that it not only that it exists in digital form, and that digital form is usually not just kept on some secured hard drive in the DA's office. That is kept in the cloud. So, and that information is usually transferred over to the defense, not in handing over CDs or flash drives, but is likely in giving them access through some sort of cloud server. There's a new way of handing over discovery here in California where they basically go through, I think the website is even evidence.com, and they send you a link The DA's office in different counties will just send you a link. Here's where you can find all your evidence. Go ahead and download it. Well, that really, I have often wondered, well, what if other people could get access to that? You telling me that some government worker has set up a impenetrable cloud service for all of this evidence? So very good point, Alicia K. Mayo, that it easily could come from a hacker. And if that's true, ironically, it's probably the best way that all of this ends up, because then the blame can't be placed at anyone's feet other than cybersecurity. And we could probably move on with our lives and get this trial underway. All right, let's take a few minutes to talk about the latest in the Bryan Walshe case, and then I'm going to get you all out of here. And you've been all so kind to stick around and support us. If you haven't liked this already, please like it. If you haven't subscribed to this channel, please subscribe. I'll have a few announcements at the end, but I wanted to give some reminders to everyone that we appreciate all your support and all everything you're doing to helping this channel grow. There he is, Bryan Walshe. He is accused in Massachusetts, a case, a courthouse that we're all familiar with at this point, with murdering and disposing of his wife, Anna Walshe, who has still never been found. Her body has never been found. She went missing around New Year's Eve of 2023. She was supposed to show up to work. When she didn't show up to work, Walshe and Reed is making Canton very busy. Jimmy McNutty, good to see you, my friend, points out. Yes, between these two cases and the what's the other awful case out of that same jurisdiction with the young girl? This is so awful that these names don't come to my mind immediately. Who was killed by the police officer? That's another one. They're very busy in this area of Massachusetts. But Anna Walshe, she goes missing. Her Birchmore, that's it, Sandra Birchmore. She goes missing. Her job reports her missing before her husband does. Problem number one. Police then go and they're searching. At this point, it's a missing persons case, and they in that search for her, under the guise of a missing persons case, they get access to some electronic devices inside of Bryan Walshe's home that include, I believe, his son's iPad. I believe that's how this all went down. And they don't have a warrant. Problem number one. They get consent from Walshe, and this is where things diverge. They get consent, and he's saying that what consent was limited to text messages that could be found on the device. Police, though, go through all of it and find Google search histories. They don't just stop with the text messages. They go into the Google searches. And in the Google searches, they find the following things, which just sickens you and still continues to fascinate me how incredibly stupid these criminals are. But these are some of the searches found on the iPad of the son, right? Quote, how long before a body starts to smell? How long for someone to be missing to inherit? I mean, think about that. He's already within days of allegedly murdering and dismembering and disposing of her, curious about inheritance. Quote, can you be charged with murder without a body? Probably something you would have wanted to search ahead of time. Can identification be made on partial remains? I mean, these are just so colossally stupid. On top of being stupid to search for them, they're also just stupid questions. How to clean blood from wooden floor. So you can see why the police want these searches. It doesn't take a brain surgeon to piece together how these might be the searches of someone who might have been involved in the disappearance, dismemberment, and disposal of his wife's body. But here's where the problem comes down to, and here's what the arguments that were being made in court recently. This all comes down to consent, and how much consent to search can you be given to police. And the reason we're dealing with this is because the police didn't have a warrant. Okay. the best way of always handling these things are to get a warrant. But I understand that the police are dealing with fast, fluid situations. They've got a missing person. Here's a likely suspect. They want to be able to find this woman. They also don't want evidence being destroyed. They don't want search histories being wiped. They got to move quickly and sometimes shoot from the hip. So they don't have a warrant. They just get his consent. Now, it's all going to come down to, how was that consent given? Is it in written form? Is it in verbal form? Was it recorded? And how broad was the consent? It comes down to the scope of the consent. Here's a quick Cliff Notes version of how this all works. First of all, consent must be voluntary and intelligent, and the police do not have to inform you that you have the right to refuse consent. It's not like a Fifth Amendment privilege where you have to be informed of your right to not speak. You don't have to be informed of your right to not consent to a search. As far as the scope goes, it's a reasonable person standard. So how would a reasonable person interpret the scope given? If the police say, hey, can I look through that iPad? And you say, sure, a lot of people would reasonably interpret that to mean they can look wherever they want. But if they're saying, I want to look for text messages, can I look in the iPad? And you say, sure, now what are you actually consenting to? And Karen C. very brightly points out, this is very similar to an issue that just came up in the Stephen case. Pardon me. That came down to an issue of consent and how much consent was given in searches. He said that he was only giving consent to, I think it was Google location or phone location data, and that they went beyond that and they found a bunch of photographs that then was the basis for all of the sexual assault allegations that have been brought against him. That case, there's interviews that were recorded and you can see the consent being given along the way. And I think the judge is going to deny all of those motions. We don't know what exists in this case. The issues have just been brought up. But again, this is why police work being done so carefully is so important, because it can have really consequential ramifications down the road. And think about it. If the judge says, based upon this interview, let's say the nightmare scenario is that he says, if you want to look for text messages, feel free, but that's it. And they find Google searches and the judge says, you don't have the consent for that. I'm going to deny the discovery of all those Google searches. It might not just be the Google searches that get kicked out. If those Google searches led to the police taking other steps that they cannot show, that they would have an independent discovery of further evidence, and it all comes out of the discovery of those Google searches, then we're invoking, fruit of the poisonous tree, and we've got other major problems in this case. So interesting development in that case. It's a case that I find to be fascinating. We actually did a case notes on this case. If you guys want to check it out, we'll include the link. It's one that kind of flies a little bit under the radar because not a lot has been happening with it, but this is a big development and we will be following it for you all more closely. Courtroom Confidential, is this the same issue with Corey Richins? I don't remember. Oh, there was a consent issue in her case as well. But it wasn't exactly the same. It was whether or not she gave them consent to even look in the phone, which is a far more kind of threshold issue. They're saying he gave consent to look in it, just he limited how far they could look in it. But yeah, it's essentially the same thing. It's all about consent and what is the scope of that. Annabelle, thank you so much, says, I'm tired of these monsters seemingly having more rights than the victims. Well, you need to talk to our Supreme Court about all of that, but it is, a big part of our system. It's just, Annabelle, if it makes you feel better, it's just about doing things the right way. The work can be done as long as it's done the right way and you don't cut corners and you're not sloppy and you're not lazy about it. And I'm not saying the cops were in this case, and I hope that they weren't, but when you are sloppy and you are lazy and you cut corners, bad things can happen. All right, guys, here's some quick announcements before I let you all go. First of all, if you missed it on Monday, we had the latest in our conversation series with Alexis Linkletter. She is the host of the podcast Unraveled, as well as the host of the podcast The First Degree. Please check that out. Fascinating conversation with her. She's got a little bit of Hollywood royalty in her family, and really enjoyed the conversation. So check it out if you guys haven't seen it already. Then all this week, if you want to be sitting at the cool kids table and watching the Karen Reed trial, then head over to our other channel, Courtroom Confidential Live Trials, where we are streaming every single day, and our group is growing more and more every single day. And it's a really nice group of people having a great conversation and keeping our heads cool as much as we possibly can. And announcement, we just opened up memberships on that channel, so you can have, you know, the green name and the emoticons and all of the good stuff that come along with that. And again, please, we appreciate all your support. And it's things have loosened up a little bit for me, so I'm going to try to pop into that channel much more. The cool CC chat, as Vesper Martini says. So check that out. Then tomorrow we are doing our monthly members only live for everybody who's a member at the classified and above level. That will be at 11 a.m. Pacific. I don't think we're changing the time, correct, Tiffany? 11 a.m. Pacific and 2 p.m. Eastern. So check that out for members. I don't know. I've got some goofy stories for you. I might be sharing some photographs. I might be telling you some recipes, all the good things that we do, all the wacky stuff that you guys all enjoy, and I enjoy hearing from you. That will be tomorrow. Saturday, we're going to have our weekly roundup. Are you guys too busy? Are you too busy to follow all of the crazy cases in true crime? Well, I've got the solution for you. That is the Courtroom Confidential Weekly Roundup. We do it every Saturday. It premieres at 6 a.m. Pacific, 9 a.m. Eastern, and it's exactly that. It's a weekly roundup of everything that's been going on in true crime. So please check it out. Sunday is Sunday Fun Day. I'll take the messages. Head over to thecourtroomconfidential.com and leave us some new messages. We've already received a lot of really great questions. This is going to be a good one. Tiffany was listening to them earlier, and she's like, this is going to be a really good Sunday Fun Day. So check that out this Sunday, 9 a.m. Pacific, noon Eastern. It will be live. We will be answering all your questions, or as many of them as we possibly can, live on Sunday Fun Day. It's becoming my favorite thing I look forward to every single week. And on Monday, then, we're going to have the latest episode in our conversation series, and we sat down with, there he is, the Sarge, Joe Giacalone. The first thing I learned from him is I have been pronouncing the porn man's name wrong all this time. I always called him Giacalone. It is not. It is Giacalone. And if you want to get really technical, he told me that it's actually Giacalone. But Joe is a fantastic guy. He is the host of True Crime with the Sarge on YouTube. And he is just a character with a story that is really phenomenal. Just decades in law enforcement in New York during when you had to be a real cop in New York. He even told me that he was the last generation of the guys to carry a 38 special on his hip. Really fun dude. And he's done a lot of things since his time in law enforcement. So we talked about that. That will premiere this Monday at 5 p.m. Pacific, 8 p.m. Eastern. Bunch of new members to thank this week. And I'm going to do it because if you guys decide to sign up for membership, then I'm going to at least do the smallest thing and thank you for doing that. And that is to Tori Burns, City Kitty, Unsolved Cases and News, Silly Kitty, Dog Mom 54, Kim Harris, Perry Winkle, Carol Pack, Winta Sky, Heidi Escobedo, Love HR Puffin Stuff, Lorraine, Tia M, Lily Polly, Guy Patrone, Mariko True, Jonah Moore, Muffin Cooper, Casey Lou, Fancy Nancy, Erica, Lady Laura, Garden Lady 60, Denisha Blyther, Not Sarah Lee 358, Paula Block, Sam. Am I missing anything, by the way, tonight, Tiffany? Cynthia Breyer, ELS, Ralte, oh boy, Ilramen Gazami, I am so sorry, Love Lighthouses, Chana Olison, Teresa Runson Batteries, Joe Schmo, Orange Rose, Julie, Emily Dugan, Pat Dodge, Jan Kunert, and therapists you know. That is a long list, and I am so thankful to all of you guys for being supporting members of this channel. If you want to learn about our membership program, go to thecourtroomconfidential.com, and you can find out about all of the benefits of it there. I think that's everything, guys. Thank you so much for being here again on another Wednesday night. CJ, I appreciate all your support and kind words, and it was good to see you all. I'm going to go tuck my little ones into bed. Good to see you guys. Take care.